All right, diving into some pretty fascinating territory today, huh? The world, according to Steve Jobs, you've sent over a really interesting mix of articles and excerpts about him. And I have to say, I'm kind of obsessed with how much there is to uncover, beyond that classic tech geniuses story.
Yeah, it's a tempting narrative for sure.
Yeah.
But what I think is really interesting about these sources, these particular sources, is how they offer these really compelling glimpses into the why behind Jobs' success. Like those driving forces we don't often talk about.
Exactly. This isn't about like reciting Apple product launches, it's about the DNA of his thinking and how it's still shaping tech, design, maybe even culture to this day.
And to really understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. Not just the birth of Apple, but the experiences that really formed Jobs' worldview early on.
Okay, so let's talk about young Steve. I think everyone knows the image, right? Like the black turtleneck, the intense stare. But what I find so fascinating from these sources are those really early moments that kind of hint at where that intensity came from.
It's like looking for the seeds of a giant oak tree,
Yeah.
right? Take that famous story about Jobs helping his dad build a fence.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
On the surface, a pretty standard father-son project, but
Yeah. But Jobs later said his dad really emphasized making even the hidden parts of the fence perfect, the
exactly.
side no one would ever see. So even as a kid, Jobs is absorbing this idea of craftsmanship that runs deeper than just appearances.
And that's echoed throughout his life, isn't it?
Hmm.
That drive to make even the internal components of a Mac beautiful, even if it meant driving his engineers crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's like the back of the fence philosophy became this core design principle.
Which I think is way more interesting than just saying, oh, Jobs was a perfectionist. It's rooted in something he observed early on.
Absolutely. And speaking of early influences, we can't overlook the profound impact of Jobs' adoption. These sources highlight how deeply it shaped his sense of self.
Yeah, it's clear that it wasn't just about like becoming part of a family. It was this feeling of being chosen, being different, almost like it fueled this need to prove himself, to live up to that feeling of being exceptional.
Precisely. And then you layer onto that the context of where he's growing up, the Bay Area in the 60s and 70s,
Hmm.
this incredible fusion of tech innovation and these counterculture movements. It wasn't just that Jobs was exposed to electronics, it's that he was immersed in this world of questioning norms, of challenging conventions right alongside it.
It's like having access to like the cutting edge of technology, but also being surrounded by people who are constantly questioning the status quo,
Yeah.
pushing boundaries. That's such a potent combination,
Yeah.
and you can see how it starts to blend together in Jobs' thinking.
And that brings us to this pivotal experience that I think really highlights this convergence. Jobs' trip to India in the 70s.
Right, because we could so easily just skim over this as like the stereotypical finding yourself journey, but these sources paint a more nuanced picture.
Exactly. Jobs wasn't just backpacking through India. He was seeking something deeper. He was drawn to the asceticism of Indian spirituality, the emphasis on simplicity, and stripping away the non-essential to reach some deeper truth. And while finding like inner peace was an ongoing process for Jobs, to say the least, you can really see how this resonated with him.
It's interesting because when you think about Apple's design philosophy, it's all about that, isn't it? Simplicity, elegance, stripping away the unnecessary to create this really seamless user experience.
Precisely. And it's not a coincidence.
Hmm.
Jobs' time in India wasn't just a detour. It was a thread woven into the very fabric of his design aesthetic. And we even see it in his outward appearance when he returned. The shaved head, the Indian clothing, those weren't just fashion choices.
Yeah, it's almost like he embodied that visual transformation.
Yeah.
A stripping away of the old to make way for this new minimalist aesthetic. But these sources make it clear that Jobs' design philosophy, it wasn't just about like Eastern influences. He was also really deeply connected to the humanities.
And this is where I think we get to challenge that image of Jobs as solely like a techie. Because he didn't just love electronics, right? He saw himself as a humanities person who saw technology as a way to express those ideas.
Yeah.
Like, as Isaacson writes in his biography, Jobs truly believed that technology was a tool to serve human needs and desires.
So it's not about rejecting technology, it's about shaping it to enhance our lives, right?
Right.
And that's where his design obsession comes in because these sources are full of stories about Jobs just like agonizing over every little detail.
Oh, absolutely. His perfectionism was legendary. Like that story about Jobs spending days obsessing over the Mac's title bar.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it seemed inconsequential to some, but for Jobs, it was about creating an emotional response in the user.
It reminds me of that quote that's attributed to him. He said, "Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works." He understood that every element, no matter how small, contributed to the overall experience.
Precisely. And then there's that funny anecdote about what was it, the Steve Jobs roll your own design philosophy?
Right.
Basically, if his team wasn't delivering what he envisioned, he'd just be like, all right, well, you guys figure it out then,
Yeah.
no matter how unconventional the methods.
Right, right. It sounds a bit chaotic, but I can see how that mentality pushed his team to innovate and think differently, which ultimately led to some pretty groundbreaking design solutions. And speaking of thinking differently, one of the most telling stories about Jobs' design philosophy has to be the one about the Macintosh PC board.
Ah, the circuit board that no one would ever see, yet Jobs insisted it had to be beautiful.
Exactly. It seemed crazy to some, but for Jobs, it was about integrity. It's like he believed that the pursuit of excellence should permeate every aspect of a product, even the hidden ones.
It speaks to this idea of like crafting this complete holistic experience
Yeah.
and this dedication to a controlled ecosystem. It's a key difference between Jobs' approach and that of someone like Bill Gates.
It's the classic Apple versus Microsoft narrative, right? You've got Jobs, who wants to create this closed system where Apple controls everything, and Gates, who's more open to licensing software and letting things play out more freely.
Exactly. And that difference in philosophy, it's so apparent in those early interactions between Jobs and Gates. Like when Jobs was trying to get Microsoft excited about developing software for the Mac, he was practically painting this picture of a revolution. But Gates and Microsoft just weren't fully convinced.
Because for Gates, it was more about selling software that could run on a variety of machines. Jobs, on the other hand, was fixated on this idea of a unified, curated experience. Which brings us to what some might consider a failure in Jobs' career, the next T chapter.
I hesitate to call it a failure. It was more like a crucible, a period of intense refinement for Jobs and his approach.
You're right. It's easy to forget that even though he was ousted from Apple, he didn't just disappear. He poured his heart into NXT, building a machine that was, in many ways, ahead of its time.
And it's fascinating to look at this period through the lens of these sources that you provided.
Mhm.
Like that anecdote about the lavish NXT office, where Jobs arrives late for a meeting with Bill Gates as this, like, subtle power play.
It shows that even in the face of setbacks, Jobs was still playing the long game.
Right.
He always had this vision he was working towards.
He always did.
And then, of course, there's Pixar.
Which I think is often overshadowed by the Apple saga,
Mhm.
but it's equally important understanding Jobs' impact.
Totally. Because Pixar represents this different facet of his leadership, his ability to foster a culture of creativity and collaboration.
Absolutely. And we see this in like how he designed the Pixar headquarters.
Mhm.
He intentionally created a space that encouraged interaction and serendipitous encounters.
Yeah.
He believed that innovation thrived in these environments where people from different disciplines could connect and spark new ideas.
It's that same philosophy he brought to the Macintosh team in those early days, creating a space where engineers and designers were constantly bumping into each other.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like he understood that innovation isn't just about individual brilliance. It's about creating the right conditions for, like, those sparks of creativity to ignite.
Precisely. And I think that's one of the most enduring lessons from Jobs' career, right? Innovation is as much about people and culture as it is about technology. But of course, no conversation about Steve Jobs would be complete without addressing the more challenging aspects of his personality. These sources, they don't shy away from that.
Yeah, you're right. He had a reputation for being incredibly demanding, confrontational, even harsh at times.
His abrasiveness was undeniable. But I think
Yeah.
it's important to view that intensity in context, right?
Mhm.
Like, while his management style could be difficult, it often yielded extraordinary results. People were driven to do their best work, even if it meant butting heads with him along the way.
It's interesting because we often hear these stories about, like, Jobs outbursts, but we also hear from colleagues who, despite those challenges, talk about this uncanny ability to inspire. Like, they were willing to endure the tough love because they believed in the vision he was so fiercely pursuing.
And that speaks to a certain like duality within Jobs, doesn't it? The brilliance, the drive, the unwavering belief in his own vision, those qualities could be both exhilarating and exhausting for those around him.
Right. It makes you think about the trade-offs, right? The cost of achieving that level of innovation, because It's clear that Jobs' legacy is complex. He was deeply flawed, but undeniably brilliant.
And that's what makes him such a compelling figure to study even all these years later.
Mhm.
Because his story, it isn't just about the rise of Apple or the success of Pixar. It's a reflection of this very human drive to
Yeah.
create, to innovate, to push the boundaries of what's possible.
It's like that iconic "Think Different" slogan. Jobs embodied that ethos, for better or for
You
worse.
really did.
And in doing so, he kind of forced us to confront some really fundamental questions about, like, the price of progress, the balance between vision and empathy, and ultimately what it means to leave an enduring mark on the world.
He certainly left us with a lot to think about.
He did. So, as you continue to explore these sources and delve even deeper into the world according to Steve Jobs, here's a question to ponder. Did Jobs fundamentally change how we interact with technology, or did he simply tap into something essential about human nature, something that was always there, waiting to be awakened?